All right, well, good morning, and thank you everyone for joining me. My name is Natalie Gupton, and we are going to go over outdoor hazards. This is a part of AgSafe's free monthly webinar series that we just reinstated for 2022. So we appreciate you being here with us. This is me. I am the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for AgSafe. I am located in Louisville, Kentucky. But as most of you know, that AgSafe office is headquartered in Modesto, California. Check out our new website at agsafe.org. Lots of great information on there. And of course, tons of trainings coming up. And follow us on social media at AgSafe Online on both Facebook and Twitter. Just a quick disclaimer, I'll let you review and then we'll dive into today's content. Okay, so today will be an overview of the following topics: field sanitation, heat illness prevention, wildfire safety, and adverse weather conditions. As you realize, this webinar is only 30 minutes, so we're just going to briefly touch on each topic, a little bit about regulations, employer responsibilities, which do an emergency, and training and resources. As a friendly reminder, this is from the federal perspective. So depending on what state you are in, you may have something specific to each area. So confirm with your state regulations to make sure that you're in compliance, especially our friends out in California. You certainly do have a lot more to follow outside of the federal standards. So first of all, field sanitation. Though may not consider this necessarily an outdoor hazard, but something that you certainly need to be aware of from outdoor safety perspective, as it does affect your operation. So 1928.110 is the actual OSHA regulation that or standard that focuses on field sanitation, which requires employers, especially within ag, to provide toilets, potable water, and hand washing facilities to your hand laborers. And also providing them education on the importance of good hygiene practices. And so this applies to any agriculture establishment employing 11 or more workers on any day of the previous 12 months. So if you employed at least 11 people last year, then you have to follow this standard to the T. According to OSHA. But also just keep in mind, if you do have you have less than 11 employees, this is just a good standard and a good practice. So find ways that you can accommodate workers as far as it comes to field sanitation. So what exactly is required? That the water shall be suitably cool. So you just don't want a tank of water to be sitting out for days at a time available to the workers. You want to make sure that it's a good temperature, that it's fresh. And the water needs to be dispensed in single-use drinking cups or by a fountain. So a common drinking cup like a ladle or a dipper does not qualify. So make sure that you have that available to your workers. Additionally, with reasonable use, the employer shall notify each employee of the location of the facility. So not just the water, but also the toilets, and that you need to also inform each employee of the importance of good hygiene practices, to actually use these facilities on a reasonable and regular basis, and then the exposure of heat in the field, communicable diseases, and retention of urine and agrochemical residue. So it just educate them on why it's important that you have to, wash your hands after you use the facilities, so on and so forth. So very important to educate your employees on these things. For the toilets, one toilet facility and one hand washing facility shall be provided for each 20 employees. So if you have 25 employees, that means you're going to have two. So I didn't go on to say a fraction thereof. So for every 20 employees, you have to have at least one facility. Needs to, be in good working order, have closing and locking doors, and ensures privacy. You need to have your hand washing and your toilet facility in close proximity because of the interconnectivity of those. Once you use a toilet facility, you need to wash your hands. This is important. It needs to be located within a 1/4 mile walk of each hand laborer's place of work in the field. And that toilet hand washing facilities are not required for employees who perform work for a period of 3 hours or less. So including transportation time to and from the field. So keep that in mind. If you do have a shorter work day, you may not have to move your facilities around, but being able to accommodate your workers with a 1/4 mile walk for your toilet and hand washing facilities. Okay, so moving on again, did promise that we're going to move quickly with heat illness prevention. So under the federal standard, there is no specific rule to heat illness prevention. However, as with most things with agriculture, it falls under the general duty clause. So the general duty clause states that employers are required to provide their employees with a place of employment that is free from recognizable hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious harms to employees. And so this does include heat illness prevention amongst other things when it comes to ag when there isn't a specific standard. So heat illness prevention plan. So this is important to have. So you can see on the screen that this is an example from California. So California, yes, does have a specific standard, even beyond what I do have included on the screen. So our folks in California, you can see the standard that you can look up and look into detail. But the reason I put this on as an example is that this is a good practice. You need to have procedures for providing sufficient water, providing for access to shade. You need to understand when temperatures exceed certain levels that you need to have procedures for those high temperatures. You have emergency response procedures, and most importantly, providing for acclimatization methods and procedures. And so again, the reason I put this up as well is that I think the federal OSHA is looking to California's plan and actually has a public meeting in May, on May 3rd, to talk about a new heat illness standard for the rest of the country. So this is important that you pay attention to and have procedures for and get ahead of the curve. Excuse me. And they will be looking at California standard to model the federal one after. So again, when it comes to heat illness prevention, you as an employer, it's your responsibility to protect your workers. You need to provide workers with water, rest, and shade, and allow newer returning workers to be gradually increasing their workloads and take more frequent breaks as they acclimatize and build a tolerance to heat. Keep in mind that individuals from different areas of the country they have different climates and different humidity levels. Having some workers that came from California, yeah, they're used to high temperatures, but over here in Kentucky and further south, we have extreme humidity. And that makes a huge difference when you're doing manual labor. And so just giving the opportunity for workers to acclimatize is very important. You need to plan for emergencies and train workers on the prevention. We'll go over some details there, and of course, monitor workers for signs of illness. So you as the employer is to train your workers on these issues, as most importantly too, your supervisors, so that they can be on the lookout for those that are doing most of the work. This is a infographic that came from OSHA, as it is a priority for them. But one thing that I found very staggering is the statistic about acclimatization, why it's so important. So nearly 3 out of 4 fatalities from heat illness happen during the first week of work. So if that does not drive home the fact that you need to provide time for acclimatization, this is a staggering statistic. So keep that in mind as you are bringing in new people for a new season. Individuals need to build a tolerance to heat by increasing intensity by 20% each day. So you can see in that graphic, start out a little bit later on the first day, and of course, potentially by the end of the week, depending on where that individual is coming from, how long they have worked before, and their experience. But again, that first week of work, be patient and plan for lower intensity levels as everyone becomes more acclimatized. Again, with heat illness prevention, you need to drink cool water. Encourage workers to drink even though they are not thirsty. When an individual becomes thirsty, I wouldn't say it's too late, but a problem can arise much more quickly at that point. So encouraging them to drink water very frequently, even if they're not thirsty, especially in those higher temperatures. Rest for long enough to recover from the heat. Take breaks in a shady or cool area. So, even though there's not a specific standard in which that you have to provide a certain area, a certain amount for shade, as a good employer, having an opportunity for workers to take breaks in shade, whether it's a canopy, whether it's a tailgate pop-up tent, if you're in a wooded area, there's a fence line with trees, but there is sufficient shade for those workers to take some rest during heat. And encourage employees to dress properly, wearing a hat and dress for the heat. Encourage one another to watch out for their coworkers, that they are aware of what some of the signs and symptoms are of a heat illness, and then actually verbally check on workers, during, whether your operation is using face coverings or not. If that you are, verbally check on them, because they may be shielded additionally from being able to visibly see certain signs and symptoms, and that they can verbally easily communicate with you. Again, training on the signs and symptoms are very important, and I will be sharing these slides with you so you can refer to them. But this chart is great, as it shows the difference between heat exhaustion or heat stroke, understanding the symptoms and the first aid. But again, training your workers on the signs and symptoms of a heat illness is important, so that one, they can be self-aware and watch out for themselves, but also that they can watch their coworkers and then communicate that, as sometimes we may not be so self-aware, or we're pushing through, or we'll come up with an excuse or wave it off as something else. And so educating everyone is a great way to keep everyone safe. And just remember that training is a key. OSHA has some wonderful resources. You can visit the AgSafe website, as we can provide some additional resources as well. NIOSH has a smart tool app for heat safety. So I personally have not jumped on there, but they do have it available for Apple and smartphone. So that is, of course, another resource that you can utilize. It's just located right there on the main page of osha.gov/heat. So as we jump into the topics, the other two topics of adverse weather conditions, as well as wildfire safety, just keep in mind that it's important to have general emergency procedures. Both in these situations, you need to have alarms. Employees will be notified of an emergency situation, whether it's verbally, by radio, cell phone, or in person, and you have potentially having buildings equipped with alarms. So, depending on your location in where you're located in the country, cell phone, you cannot always rely on cell phones, especially in emergency situation. Sometimes signals aren't great. Sometimes those towers can be down. So having an alternative method on when to use a particular alarm or notification system, just being able to communicate with employees. If for some reason communication is shut down altogether, that your employees know what to do. Potentially that, if situation goes awry, bad weather, communication systems are down, where do we need to go so we can account for everyone? So having emergency gathering location is essential. Need to notify where this is located. Are there a couple different places based on your particular work area? Have those designated. And of course, this should be a part of your emergency action plan. And employees are trained, and so they know when certain conditions occur that this is where they need to gather to be accounted for, and or it's their place of evacuation. You need to have evacuation procedures for all your facilities. Depending on how big your farm is, how big your operation, it can vary between your offices, your barns, your shops, your labor houses, and of course the fields. So keep that in mind when it comes to adverse weather conditions. Now, here in Kentucky, we have to deal with thunderstorms, we have flooding. Earthquakes aren't necessarily something that we have to be very cognizant of, but they do occur. So there's just a variety of weather conditions that you need to be prepared for, depending on where you're located in the country. And then there's the time of year. There's spring, winter, fall, and summer. So having procedures for each is important, and to train on those as well. So flooding and severe weather, again, going back to, it is your responsibility as the employer to provide a safe place to work. And so you need to prepare your managers, your supervisors, and or just yourself to have that plan and to know when to make a decision to stop work in enough time that you can accommodate, so to speak, severe weather, that employees have enough time to easily finish work or stop work at a reasonable spot, and to be able to get to a safer location, whether it's you're taking lunch early, if you're going to a barn, if you're going to the shop, whatever it may be, that those decisions are made in a timely enough manner that those employees can respond. The decision to stop work will be made as early in the day as possible and will be communicated down the chain of command. Again, that will vary depending on the size of your operation. It just may be you calling the 5 employees that you have. But it's great that you would be able to communicate that, what, the weather forecast is not in our favor today. projecting thunderstorms, but I do have work for you. We're going to work inside today, and so that they know that they don't need to report to the field that day. So planning ahead, watching weather forecasts, very important. And again, depending on how big your operation, that, office staff are notified, if particular offices need to be closed, if you're in an area of the country that flooding occurs, or there's certain roads that are closed down. So just accommodating for that and communicating that to everyone in a timely fashion. And then just encourage everyone, both employees, managers, to use good judgment and not to take unnecessary risk. It is important, you as the owner, that you stress safety, and that you do not want them to jeopardize their safety just for the sake of coming to work. That you understand that they're exercising good judgment and are communicating with you in the best way possible, and that you value that and you encourage that. And so that is how you keep everyone safe, is that you communicate that value to them, so they don't feel like they're going to be punished because their road is closed and it's a little flooded, because it's flooded, and so they're not risking themselves by crossing a flooded area to get to work, because you've stressed that you have to have them to work the next day. Okay, wildfires. Again, this is something, it depends on where you are in the country. Friends in California, out west, this is something that you have to deal with on a regular basis. And so being mindful of, is this something that needs to be top of mind, or something that we just need to be prepared for periodically? Here in Kentucky, in Tennessee, on occasion we do get wildfires. We do have a lot of forestry, and we do get dry conditions, but not something that we have to deal with very often. Wildfires present hazards that employees in affected areas must understand, and that hazardous conditions are not always visible. Smoke from wildfires contain chemicals, gases, and fine particles that harm health. And smoke can hurt your eyes, irritate your respiratory system, and potentially worsen chronic diseases such as lung or heart. And it may continue long after the fires have extinguished and cleanups are continuing. So being mindful of that and taking that consideration when work continues. The aftermath of a wildfire can cause injury, illness, and even death due to its effect on the environment and its surroundings, the soil, your structures, electrical power lines, all your infrastructure. And so taking that into consideration is very important. Again, so some things to take in consideration as potential hazards in wildfire areas include, but also realize that it's not limited to. You've got fire and fire byproducts such as smoke, electricity and flammable gases, unstable structures, demolition and excavation, sharp or flying objects, confined spaces, carbon monoxide, asbestos, hazardous chemicals and substances, and heat illness. So again, depending on your operation, the conditions that are around you, the structures that were there or still there when it comes to wildfires. So important to take these into consideration. Somebody mentions falling trees. Absolutely. And being aware of that. And again, it depends on your landscape and your farm and your operation, what you may be exposed to. And so planning ahead of time if you are exposed to a fire. After a wildfire, you want to provide an assessment of the affected area. Again, looking for all these hazards and understanding what employees may be exposed to, and taking that consideration, maybe providing additional PPE, maybe halting work further for a longer period of time until things are considered safe. Personal protective equipment. Now, this is something that I want to stress that depending where you're located, that you may have specific standards. Again, California, there are smoke safety standards that you need to follow, and specific conditions in which you need to follow based off of what had occurred in your region and in your area. And so providing proper personal protective equipment and proper training for wearing these pieces are important. You know, it may be at a wide range of respirators, safety glasses, boots, hard hat, gloves, specific types of clothing. And so just being aware of that. Additionally, other protective clothing as required by chemical safety data sheets of materials on hand that could have been released in the air or spilled. And other things to take into consideration are hazardous material spills with your containment plan and procedures and cleanup, spill prevention, but also your fire prevention plan and your respiratory protection plan. Again, being mindful of respirator use and having proper training and fit testing and all the things that are required that with wearing a respirator. So with that, that concludes our brief overview of potential outdoor hazards. So I will hang on just a moment to see if anybody has any questions or comments. But my contact information there is on the screen. Additionally, I will be emailing a copy of the PowerPoint slides to you to the email address that was used to register for today's webinar. So with that, I thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful and safe day.